Welcome to the Building Up Women in Property podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Bangura, and I'm thrilled to have you here with me today. This podcast is for ambitious women who work in property and construction, who want to learn how to have a career they love on their terms. Join me every week where I'll leave you excited and confident to take your next steps. Thanks for being here with me. Now let's get started. Hello and welcome to another episode of the podcast. I appreciate you spending your time with me. And today I want to talk about recognizing and managing imposter syndrome. Now, imposter syndrome is something that gets bandied around a lot, especially in reference to women and their careers. But today I wanted to go back to the basics and actually talk about what imposter syndrome is, what it isn't, and how to identify if you're experiencing it. And in doing so, we are able to create a common understanding so that we can support each other and also normalise this experience that so many of us have so that it doesn't hold us back. And we'll also be talking about some strategies to help you manage it. And I say this because as much as I would like to wave a magic wand and make imposter syndrome go away, the reality is it is something that you need to learn to manage. And the more you practice these strategies, the better able you'll be able to use the imposter syndrome intentionally to fuel you and your progress rather than to paralyze you and keep you stuck. So let's get into it. What is imposter syndrome? So firstly, it isn't actually a syndrome at all. There is no clinical diagnosis. Instead, it's a self-diagnosed phenomenon. And in short, it's the sense that you haven't actually earned the achievements that you have. It can be that feeling that you're a fake or a fraud, and that's why it's sometimes also referred to as perceived fraudulence. And so you believe that your success is an illusion and that you're a fraud, and that creates the fear of them being found out or being discovered as incompetent. It's as though it's a ticking time bomb, and at some point, everything could come crashing down on you. And fundamentally, it's when our own self-perception just doesn't align with what others think about us. Our own concept is built on an overwhelming feeling of self-doubt, irrespective of the achievements or the success we've achieved. And that then generates a sense of unworthiness and a complete lack of certainty about our own skills and abilities. And I think it's important to make the distinction that while imposter syndrome ultimately creates a lack of confidence, the two terms, imposter syndrome and confidence or self-confidence, are not synonymous with each other. And by that, I mean, you could be experiencing low self-confidence, but not be experiencing imposter syndrome. Not everyone does have this. And if you don't experience imposter syndrome, like, power to you. That is brilliant. We need more people feeling that way. So let it go. And you can just move on through this one. But on the broader topic of self-confidence, we will be talking about this a lot in upcoming episodes, because it is that lack of self-confidence that I think is the number one issue that I see holding women back. It keeps us playing small, and there is so much to unpack there. There are so many reasons and causes. We will definitely go deeper into confidence in coming episodes, so stay tuned. But back to imposter syndrome. So essentially, you think that you've fooled others into believing you are something that you're not. And with that, we can start to encounter feelings of isolation and disconnection because we think that we are the only ones feeling this. And we are so afraid of being found out or discovered that we just don't want to let people in. And this is something that we do subconsciously. We're not even aware that this is happening, but it can be that we kind of create this force field around us just to protect ourselves. And while we may feel like we're alone and we're the only person that experiences this, the reality is imposter syndrome is very common, with up to 82% of people identifying as having it. And it can be really helpful to think about imposter syndrome not as a binary state, but as a spectrum. So most people, that 82% will experience some level of imposter syndrome. But what gets really interesting is the severity and the prevalence of imposter syndrome, which is much higher in people from underrepresented groups, like women in the property and construction industry. And of course, if you're then, a woman of colour or part of any number of other underrepresented groups, it is likely that you will suffer from imposter syndrome much more acutely. I think that makes sense because when you are the only woman in the room, or there are hardly any industry leaders that look like you can start to feel like a unicorn. We also tend to feel pressure then to represent everyone that's like us and not screw up. It's like for the sake of women everywhere, we feel that we need to get it right and be perfect so that the room full of, usually white blokes don't think we're stupid and we don't ruin it for all women and that we don't play into the stereotypes of traditional gender roles. I kind of say that tongue in cheek, but this is how we actually respond. And I know from my own career that I've always had to be prepared and that I could never completely let my guard down or risk being seen as fallible because it could then be perceived as weakness. And, there was no ground to give. So the result for me was that I overworked so that I could maintain this perfect mask or guise of always having my shit together. And over time, that almost built up as this kind of invisible armor that I wore. And it's something that I still really have to consciously remind myself of and actually allow myself to let go of that need for control and need for perfectionism and actually recognize that it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to let go of that perfectionism. And it's so important because, it's okay to let go of perfectionism. In fact, it's actually necessary for us to let go of it in order to get ahead and to avoid burnout and anxiety. But I say all of this because if you are a perfectionist, this is often a telltale sign that you suffer imposter syndrome. Now, other signs are that you might avoid taking risks or you may deliberately avoid being visible. And both of these ultimately mean that we're playing small. And they mean we don't push ourselves for the promotion or the new role until we're, 1,000% certain that we can do it. While in the meantime, our male counterparts with equal or sometimes lesser experience are throwing themselves into leadership and growth opportunities. And we're holding back, scared of getting it wrong, scared of screwing up, scared of being found out. And of course, this does nothing to help increase women's participation or representation in management and leadership across the industry. And please don't get me wrong, these issues around representation and diversity and equity, these are big issues. And they are not the fault of us as women because we're not pushing ourselves out of our comfort zone. I don't mean to imply that at all. These are all entrenched issues that require deliberate, intentional, and systemic change. And that needs to be driven by leadership. It doesn't sit on the shoulders of every woman to fix all these issues, right? I'll save my rant on that for another episode perhaps. But I do think that having this self-awareness and understanding the impacts of imposter syndrome and how it might be showing up for each of us is really crucial. Because once we recognize these patterns of behavior in ourselves, we can then start to consciously challenge our thoughts and we can start to choose to act differently and respond to our own imposter syndrome in a way that actually supports our progression as well as our well-being. Because while imposter syndrome, it does have a lot of negatives and challenges that it brings with it, it can also be a great motivator. Because as high-achieving women with leadership aspirations and with that desire to create change in the industry, it can actually fuel us to improve our abilities and to keep leveling up. But we just need to make sure that we do it in a healthy way that doesn't lead to, the anxiety or the stress or the exhaustion that can come with it. And we also really need to be able to detach our own self-worth from our achievements and from the external validation, which I know from personal experience can be a very hard thing to do. But while we have our self-worth tied up in what other people think of us and our external achievements, it can be really hard to actually trust ourselves. And that's a really crucial part of personal development and growth and a skill that's definitely something worth learning and investing in. And so this practice of working and understanding imposter syndrome, it really is an ongoing process. And it's one that we need to consistently employ in order to effectively manage imposter syndrome and to shift out of it keeping us small and being disconnected and scared into allowing us to use it as fuel to uplevel and evolve and grow. And in order to do this, we really need to do 6 things. And the first is we need to be very intentional about our self-awareness. So we need to understand and know the signs of imposter syndrome and how they show up in ourselves. And we want this so that we can recognize these signs as soon as possible. And this can show up in so many ways. So it can be finding it really hard to accept praise, the perfectionism that we spoke about, or, holding yourself to a ridiculously high standard. It can be the fear of failure that actually paralyzes you. So you'd rather do nothing than risk failure. Or it could be constant thoughts of I'm not good enough and noticing when they trigger. Or it could be the signs of disconnecting and pulling away from people. And so, as I said, really pay attention to your thoughts and your behaviors and learn what the early warning signs are for you. Where are you feeling misaligned? And what do you start to do? And once you recognize these things, firstly, I want you to just practice some self-compassion, right? You are human and we all go through similar emotions. Like there's nothing wrong with you. You're just being triggered by a well-established thought pattern. And so I want you to really start paying attention to your thoughts and to learn what your early warning signs are so that you recognize them in yourself. And when you do recognize them, first of all, I just want you to practice a little self-compassion in that moment because there is nothing wrong with you. You've not done anything wrong. You're not doing anything wrong. You are just responding to a well-established thought pattern that is running in your brain. And this self-awareness allows us to notice it and then look at how we respond to it consciously. I hope you've been enjoying the episode. I wanted to take a moment to let you know about my free Career Confidence Masterclass. This is for ambitious career-orientated women who are ready to stop playing small and to confidently create a career you love. Head over to my website, beautifuldisruptions.com for more info. Now let's get back to the episode. The second one is really get clear on the facts, right? So notice that thought or the trigger and then challenge it. Is what you're thinking actually true? Like most of the time when we ask ourselves that, the answer is no, right? Our brain psychs us out, but the truth is it's not actually a fact. And so force yourself to answer those questions. Is it true? What concrete evidence do I have? Would everyone agree with this belief that I have or this thought that I have about myself? And so I want you to actually take it a step further and seek evidence to support an empowering thought. So an example of this might be if you are thinking, I'm unqualified to offer an opinion on this matter. Is that true? I'm using an example, but if you're a structural engineer and there's a structural question, you might be thinking, oh, I don't know all the answers. I'm not qualified for this. But the truth is you probably are. You might not know all the answers, but you probably have the best knowledge in the room. And yeah, you went to uni, you got a degree in this, you passed a series of courses that demonstrated your knowledge in this field. So you may not be perfect, but you are well placed to provide an educated opinion on this topic, right? So think about that. I have a degree. I've worked on these other projects. Think about all the things that you do know. Find the evidence to affirm a positive, empowering belief rather than indulging in the negative belief or the negative self-perception that you have. Now, the third one is get some support. Share with someone that you trust how you are feeling, not for the sake of them necessarily giving you positive feedback, but just to get it off your chest, right? Sometimes just saying it out loud, we realize the incongruencies with our thinking and it just feels better. So just have a handful of people that you trust who you can talk to openly about these things. Fourth is I want you to consciously rewrite your story, okay? So the feeling that you're having is completely normal, right? You don't know everything. You could screw up. These are all possibilities. But I want you to think, I'm capable, right? And I'm deserving. And I'm willing to become more competent as I learn. And I'm willing to go through that growth process. It requires you to let go of that perfectionism and to be vulnerable and also to really be open to learning and to cultivate that growth mindset that is so essential if you want to keep evolving and keep developing your skills and your knowledge and your personal growth. Now, number 5 is open up and share your journey. So be willing to take people behind the scenes of your life, right? Talk about the good things as well as the bad things and the ugly things, right? Like intentionally celebrate your successes. Really recognize them. Don't just brush them off, but actually stand in those moments and those achievements and embody them for a bit. Feel it. Allow yourself to celebrate and acknowledge what you have achieved. And then on the other side, it's also about sharing your failures, right? Create meaningful reflections from these. We don't have to show the sugar-coated version of everything. Get a bit gritty. Allow people to see your growth path and that you continue to evolve and learn and progress and move forward from that. That's so powerful. And people resonate with that because the truth is everyone is figuring everything out, right? I have yet to meet someone who has their shit together completely. It's not the human experience. We're all learning and growing. And the more we can support each other on that journey by sharing our own experiences, the better and the more successful we will all be. And so now the final step is I want you to just accept that this feeling of imposter syndrome will always be there, but just acknowledge it will be varying degrees, right? And as you level up, don't try and fight it. Just learn to work with it. So stop resisting the feelings and get curious. Start to really explore them, recognize them, and move forward. So I hope that was helpful in terms of increasing your understanding and your own awareness of imposter syndrome and what it looks like for you. And as I said, please just commit to keep working through this because we really do need your voice in the industry and we don't want imposter syndrome to drown out all the things you could do if you were able to move past it. And if you do have any personal insights from what we've covered today, then please reach out and share them with me. I would love to hear from you. Okay, have a beautiful day. Until next time. Thanks for joining me on the Building Up Women in Property podcast. If you're listening on Apple Podcast or Spotify, I'd love for you to take a moment and review the show if you found it helpful or share it with a few friends. Thanks again. Have a beautiful day and I'll see you next time.